Warlord, Saga of the Storm, Into the Accordlands, Story number 11, Memoriam, by Graham Moyer. Mason stared in horror as the top of the wall began to sway. How could this be happening? She looked away from the imminent crisis and began searching her diagrams. Had Bearer and Dig not set the foundation deep enough? Or too narrow? Did Sluice neglect some critical element of drainage? Or could it have been her? Was there some fundamental flaw in her plan? Teams of sounders and deep scouts had reported hearing unusual noises through previously abandoned caverns in the area. On further investigation, they had determined something was coming towards Rockholm, and quickly. There were other creatures besides the dwarves that burrowed beneath the Accordlands. Barrowgrim and Katek, even Grathenkbeasts, and none were friendly. Construction began immediately, so that whatever burst into the passageway would find itself confronted by a massive wall, the pinnacle of dwarven engineering. And now that wall was wobbling dangerously as dwarves scurried around the base, some trying to shore it up, others trying to get out of the way in case of a collapse. This is nothing that has not happened before. You have the answers. All you need is time. A voice came from behind Mason, rich, deep, and gentle. Mason turned and saw her. She stood alone, blue-robed and blue-eyed, her long gray hair done up in two elaborate tails that nearly reached the floor behind her. She held the book in her left hand and an architect's eye in her right, her quill tucked into the front of her robe. "The dwarves need your guidance. I'll get their attention," she said, "but you must address them." Mason took a deep breath. She was right. The important thing was not to figure out what had gone wrong and fix it. It was to stop the wall from collapsing. When the danger had passed, mistakes could be addressed. She turned after the blue-gray woman and began to shout out orders. The sounds were intolerable. Thousands of chitinous spikes screeching on stone combined with a terrible drone that did something to muffle the screams of the dwarves below. The sight, if anything, was worse. The advance party of Blackstone raiders was being vivisected before their eyes. The dwarves had been waiting for the breach through the cavern wall, raiders outside and warriors on the wall, to be prepared for anything that might come through. It had all happened so fast. A small hole had opened and two large arachnid talons had come through. They had held their breath, and then the entire wall had burst apart and the beasts surged in, eight-legged behemoths with vaguely humanoid torsos mounted on the bodies of grotesque spiders. Protector braced his towering shield against the wall's crenellations, throwing his full weight behind it. He could no longer see the massacre below, but he could hear the scritching of the beast's claws growing closer, and could see determination and fear jumbled together in the face of Reach behind him, long axe at the ready and eyes fixed on the oncoming horrors. Then a huge weight pressed upon his shield, and black bug talons began to poke around the side. Protector strained to keep himself upright while keeping his arms away from the spikes. Reach's fear had been replaced with the rage of battle, and the dwarf brought his axe down over Protector's head again and again, his beard splashing with gray ichor. The weight lifted, and Protector heaved forward and watched in satisfaction as a spider creature tumbled off the wall, dead. Then the Protector next to him fell, and two more of the spider beasts burst over the top of the wall to the right. Protector whirled as fast as he could, but there was nothing to brace against, and one of the monsters bowled him over. The other was on Reach before Protector could so much as cry out. It darted within the range of his long axe. Reach's swing went wild and did little more than chip at the creature's thorax. 4 of the beast's spikes pierced Reach's side as its clawed hands grabbed the sides of his head and bit halfway through his neck. Then Protector was caught in his own fight for survival. His shield was bigger than he was, and flat on his back he tucked in his feet and head as razor-sharp talons stabbed around and under it. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see its pale, gnashing face and needle-filled maw. Behind it, the top of the wall was in chaos, spiders loose among the surviving dwarves. "Dwarves of Rockholm!" A deep, rich voice cut through the droning and screeching of the spiders, gentle despite its volume, but with a strength reminiscent of the deepest dwarven stone. "This is not the end. For 1,000 years, your ancestors have held this land against the worst monsters of history. Your descendants will hold it for 1,000 years from now. I see their strength in all of you, and I see that you will pass that strength on to all the dwarves to come. Axes and hammers, shields and walls, now is your time, for Rockholm! A blinding light was coming from the bottom of the dwarven side of the wall, and the spider on Protector looked wildly towards it, then lifted its hands to keep the light from its eyes. Protector seized the opportunity and rocked himself up onto one knee, dug in his heel, and began to push the creature back with his shield. All around him, dwarves were rallying, hewing the legs off the spiders, pushing them back from the edge of the wall, pulling their injured comrades away from the fight. Above him, light stone gargoyles clambered across the ceiling and dropped onto the fleeing spider beasts. "Rockholm!" Protector screamed, elated, defiant. "For Rockholm!" The High Council was arrayed on top of the wall, facing Rockholm, heads bowed. Before them stretched the open graves of the fallen, over 100 along the inside of the wall. Any dwarf whose duty permitted knelt in front of the burial in silent contemplation. Among the graves, at the base of the wall, stood a woman clad in priestly blue, her gray hair divided into 2 tails that trailed along behind her. She carried a gigantic tome open in front of her, but her piercing blue eyes looked only at the living dwarves assembled around her, and the dead dwarves at her feet. "The life of a dwarf is a life of duty," Memoriam began in a rich, soft voice. "Since the time of King Hember, the dwarves have defended all life in the Accordlands, and without them, it could not continue. We have shouldered the responsibility of a continent, and done so willingly, without complaint. Every day for the past 1,000 years, our people have saved the world. Not just our fighters and seers, but the masons who house us, the farmers who feed us, the teachers who shape us into what we must become. Every dwarf relies on every other dwarf, and every dwarf must do their duty so that the dwarven forges may blaze eternal. Yesterday, every dwarf did their duty in a terrible battle against an unknown foe. For 137 of us, that duty entailed tremendous sacrifice. But the life of a dwarf is not something that can simply be taken by some monster. The life of a dwarf is the protection of all dwarves, of all the world. And so, our brothers and sisters live on, protecting this bastion today as they did yesterday, as they will for every year to come." Memoriam looked upwards, and her eyes flashed with power, illuminating the wall behind her in a pale blue light. The graves of the fallen dwarves began to fill in with earth, reinforcing the base of the wall. "We will now read the names of the dead. We will remember the service they have done and honor the service they shall do." The congregation sat silent as Memoriam read through the names she had added to the Book of Deeds. As Memoriam committed the names of the dead to eternal legend, every dwarf present knew that one day their names too would be read, and they were content. Thank you for listening. Please consider subscribing so that you don't miss the next story, The Ballad of the Bear and His Merry Men, by Wesley A. Youngren.